So before we start, I'd like to say a few things outright. Final Fantasy Explorers isn't what I would call a clone. It's a bit of a stretch to say that it's a clone because that would imply that Square copied Capcom, and sure there are a bunch of similarities, but only in the same way that Battlefield and Call of Duty are first-person shooters. But don't worry about that, we'll get to that in a moment. But that being said, the purpose of this series is to kind of give you games that might scratch that Monster Hunter itch. You know, if you're tired of Monster Hunter but you still want to play a game that's similar, that's kind of what this series is for. So now on to Final Fantasy Explorers. I haven't actually heard of this game until January, right before it released, which is January this year. And I watched the trailer and the same thing popped into my head as when I watched the Dragon Hunter trailer actually. But there was one key difference. And that is, I trust Square a hell of a lot more than I trust some no-name MMORPG company. It kind of looked like a mashup of Final Fantasy and Monster Hunter, and it's basically that. So you make your hero and everything, and you're immediately thrown into battle. I don't think you could take on this behemoth. He would stomp you out of existence if he could. So you have to run away, and you leave your lunch friend all by his lonesome, and you come to this little town that kind of acts as the hub for the game. It's pretty straightforward. You talk to a person at the desk, and they give you a mission, whether it be collecting items or killing monsters. Gee, doesn't this sound familiar? So when you get in game, you'll be a meager little freelancer, basically a sheltered child that doesn't hold up very well on their own. But soon enough, you unlock nearly 24 different jobs that you can switch between in old school Final Fantasy fashion. Whether you want to be a black mage, a cunning thief, a dark knight, or a monk, there's a huge variety of classes to pick between, all with different weapons and skills. Now I don't know if it's just me, but some classes are just totally not worth playing. They might be too slow or their skills are just not strong enough. For example, black mages are super strong, especially early game, but when I played the thief it was very difficult for me. The damage output was so low that it was just too hard to kill anything. Even using their skills I could barely kill one of the first large monsters. But despite this, you aren't locked into any classes, which is a godsend. I went through a bunch of different classes before deciding that my favorite as of right now was the good old-fashioned knight. The Dark Knight and the Dragoon were pretty cool as well. The Dragoon uses lances and halberds and had a lot of airborne attacks, like this jump attack that reminds me of Kirby's grab in Smash Bros. As you progress through the game, there's a pair of NPCs I'll call fan service Muggles. They give you outfits of other characters in the franchise. Leave it to Square Enix to live in the past and shove Cloud and Sephiroth and Lightning down our throats. In fact, is Lightning even a likable character? I didn't think anybody cared for her games, but the outfits are okay, I suppose. They're decent if you have the materials for them, but I would love to see more original outfits and weapons. Don't get me wrong, there are quite a bit of them, but I would just like to see more original, unique designs. You also have the ability to morph into the special characters for a brief moment, but in my opinion, it's not really too exciting. After you turn into Squall for the umpteenth time, you realize how weird it is that the game actually lets you summon and play as these characters. You might want to leave your impressions at the door when you actually get into the field and battle monsters, because it's not really similar to other games in the genre. The first thing I noticed is the lack of mobility. It's harder to actually dodge attacks because your character isn't very quick or mobile or anything like that. It's kind of like a potato. Not really, he's not like a potato. There's no roll or evasive movement really, just expected to take the hits and heal up with magic afterwards. You also have access to up to 8 weapon-dependent skills that you can use at any time. I really like the skill setup in Final Fantasy Explorers because you can customize the skills to have a variety of different effects and attributes by fighting monsters. For example, you could add ice damage to a lightning attack, give your healing spell a regeneration bonus, or even a small vorpal effect for your melee weapon. These custom skills really add a lot of variety to the way your characters are set up, and the way that they are played. Speaking of customization, while there are an okay amount of armors and equipments, I really would like more, but the amount that they have is okay for now. The real beauty comes from upgrading them. This is a huge time sink because you upgrade your equipment very gradually through monster parts. Certain pieces of loot might give your weapon one physical or magic attack, while others might give your weapon a point of accuracy. That's 1 point here, 1 point there, but before you know it, it could stack up and be comparable to the next tier of unlockable weapons. Not only that, but some weapons have passive effects by default, so in some cases it might actually be worth to keep an old weapon because it has a neat effect and the upgrades that you placed on it already. You can use the souls of monsters to add more physical effects to them, like fire damage or confusion, but these are much harder to obtain and there are a limited amount of them that you can place on any one piece of equipment. Most missions you accept will be fairly straightforward and simple, like gathering items, defeating a large monster, or killing several smaller monsters. Many of the large monsters are actually pretty easy, like this turtle dude or this giant ass tank bro. Some of them can be challenging the first time around because you might be unfamiliar, looking at you, Thunder Guy, with their attacks, but in general it's pretty easy going. If you do end up dying, you could resurrect right where you died, and the game will just shave 5 minutes off of your time limit. It's pretty convenient because it keeps the action going. It doesn't really give you any downtime, and some people actually prefer that. In terms of monster design, expect to see some pretty familiar names around. There's Ifrit, Shiva, Alexander, and all those famous summons from earlier games. They are present here, and the difference is now that you'll be fighting against them instead of asking for their help. My favorite is easily the Cactuars. They're just so derpy and memorable. It reminds me of the giant cactus in Digimon, actually. One thing I feel like I should mention is the size of the game world. It's a very large map. It takes place on an island, and you explore every corner of the island, basically. But unfortunately, a lot of it feels boring. There are some areas that are the same every time you visit them, and that's fine, I don't have a problem with that, but there are a lot of these randomly generated areas, and I say randomly with quotes above it because I don't think they're really random. But every time you leave one of these large areas, you have to go through 3 of these totally not prefabricated corridors. It's very time consuming and not very fun because usually you just end up running straight through them and past all of these really weak feeder mobs. When you start a quest, you can teleport to a selection of areas, but typically you have to do a bit of running before you actually get to the large monsters. And it's just so odd because when the rest of the game is pretty streamlined, having to run between these areas gets old very quickly. Fortunately, there is an online portion of Final Fantasy Explorers. The only thing that really sucks about it is that there aren't many people playing it right now. If you want to farm for something or play online with other people consistently, then it'd probably be best to check out the Final Fantasy Explorers subreddit or play with a few buddies of your own. One thing I did notice is that it can be kind of laggy online, especially if other players have classes with really intensive skills. I played online with a machinist and a few other folks, and it was pretty rough. Some of the skills would really bring the frame rate down to a crawl. There's also no voice chat or keyboard, just a bunch of preset messages you can send. Fortunately, none of these things makes the game unplayable, and the online multiplayer really adds an extra dimension to the game, as well as a reason to replay it. After all, it's a lot more entertaining to play games with your friends than by yourself, at least in my opinion. If you have no access to Wi-Fi or you don't want to play with other people, you can resurrect the souls of monsters you've defeated to accompany you into battle. God, that sounds really morbid, but that's basically what happens. These monsters will follow you into battle, level up, help you fight, and do monstery stuff as you would expect. It's totally possible to play happily by yourself. And there you have it, a quick little review of Final Fantasy Explorers. In terms of Monster Hunter, it's not really a clone, or at least I wouldn't say it is. The gameplay and a lot of the mechanics are totally not similar, and the play feel is just all around different. That doesn't mean it's bad though. I actually enjoyed Final Fantasy Explorers quite a bit. Just don't expect anything kind of similar to Monster Hunter besides a few structural things. I'd say it's more akin to something like Phantasy Star, honestly. Point is, it's pretty fun, and you should totally give it a chance if you think it sounds interesting and if you have a 3DS. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a comment, a thumbs up, and maybe even a subscribe if you're feeling up to it. Next time on Monster Hunter Clones, we're going to take a look at the God Eater games, or at least the ones that I can get my hands on. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.